Like yoga is a lifelong learning thing. Like you will never know everything there is to know about yoga in the same way that you will never know everything there is to know about veterinary. So it's good for people who like to continue to learn and expand their knowledge base, I think.
Hi guys, and welcome to the House Call Vet Cafe podcast. I'm Dr. Eve Harrison. I'm a full-time integrative concierge house call veterinarian in Los Angeles, and I help other vets to build their unique mobile practices on their terms. This podcast is for and by house call and mobile veterinarians, so it is meant to give our community a platform to connect, to share our stories, to lift each other up, and to support each other. Most of us work solo as lone wolves, right? So for me, it's been really powerful to be able to physically hear the voices of my colleagues from all over the world and to get a chance to feel that we truly are part of a community of very real other human beings who get it. While you may be alone in that little bubble of your own vehicle when you're on the road seeing patients, I welcome you to join our community by tuning into our own podcast when you're on your way to your next house call. Whether you're a super experienced house call vet with 30 years of experience, you're a brand new prospective house call vet just looking to get started, or you're house call curious, there will be something for you in this podcast. Each episode, you will hear interviews from other mobile veterinarians just like yourself who are doing unique and innovative things, vets who are sharing their stories, their struggles and challenges, and you can also look forward to hearing valuable information and perspectives from specialists and experts outside of our micro niche. And finally, if becoming a house call veterinarian is something that you've been thinking about exploring, or you're looking for some extra support getting your own mobile practice to feel more profitable and sustainable for you, check out the information in the show notes about my course and our above and beyond supportive private community for members only, plus our monthly group coaching sessions within the House Call Vet Academy. You can also check out my free public Facebook group, which is also called the House Call Vet Cafe, the same name as this podcast, and which is a warm and cozy community for mobile vets to support each other in professional and personal development, in creative entrepreneurship, and in friendship. So thank you guys for spending time with me today. Let's dive into the episode.
If you're looking for help with ultrasound scanning, whether that's choosing a new machine or developing your ultrasound skills, check out the First Opinion Veterinary Ultrasound website at fovu.co.uk for independent machine reviews and online and in-person teaching options. FOVU, simplifying ultrasound.
Okay, good morning, Moonshines. I guess it is not morning where our next guest is from and is located right now. We have the magnificent Dr. Chloe Hannigan, who is a practicing vet and a qualified yoga teacher with us today. If you were at the House Call and Mobile Vet Virtual Conference, you got to meet her and take her yoga class. She's wonderful. And so I'm going to tell you just a little bit about her, and then we're going to hear right from Dr. Chloe herself. So she qualified from the RVC in 2012, and whilst she started in mixed practice, she is now a small animal locum. She recently did her advanced yoga teacher training in India. I'm very jealous, and teaches both yoga and meditation mainly for the veterinary community. This is so cool. So a little bit about her business, VetYogi. It was founded by her, of course, in order to improve the physical, mental, and emotional well-being, specifically of the veterinary profession. And as a locum vet, she has been in practice throughout the pandemic, so has firsthand experience of the extra stressors that our profession has faced over the last couple of years. And so through VetYogi, Chloe provides tailored yoga and meditation classes, workshops, conference speaker sessions, all of that good stuff. She's got a really awesome Instagram page that you guys should check out as well. And she does all this really specifically tailored for veterinary individuals, practices, and groups. And she also, incidentally, has really cool VetYogi swag, including clothes, accessories, home fragrance stuff. She has a really cool yoga mat that I really want to get. We'll have to find out if she can ship it to the US. I think there might be some issues there, but I've been drooling over that thing, so just saying. So welcome, Chloe. I'm super excited to interview you on this podcast. And also thank you for having me on your Instagram Live last week. That was really, really fun. So welcome.
Thank you. And you're very welcome. I had a lovely time chatting with you on Instagram Live last week. So I've been looking forward to speaking with you today as well.
Very nice. So I wanted to start out our episode how I always start out. What's your favorite snack to eat while you're in the car? And in your case, you're doing locum work more so than house call work at the moment. I know you've done a little bit of house call work, which we'll get to. But do you snack in the car? And if so, what do you snack on?
I do sometimes snack in the car, but well, it sounds really bad, but honestly, it's usually me eating a bit of breakfast in the car because I don't like eating when I first wake up, and I don't like getting up super early either. So I will usually try and have a banana in the car because I find they're really easy to eat while you're driving, and they're a good source of energy. Or I'll have like a trail mix bar. Yeah, they're probably the main things that I eat in the car. I sometimes keep like a little tub of, like just little boiled sweets if you need a little sugar boost.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, but I don't tend to go for anything too complicated because here in the UK, it's more common that we drive manual cars, or I guess you guys call them stick shift. So it's not easy to like eat things that require, hands because we're constantly using our other hand to change gear. So yeah, you got to keep it simple if you're driving a manual car.
Very interesting. Yeah, driving a manual car sounds like my worst nightmare. I didn't even realize that was so common in the UK. Very interesting. And I'm a huge fan of bananas as well, so very nice.
Get that potassium. Get it.
Yeah, get it. I actually like, speaking of potassium and bananas, you're a person I think that would appreciate this. I will eat a banana or two before I have to do something that makes me very nervous because of that potassium. Like whenever I perform on the flute, or even when I used to teach more yoga classes, if I was feeling a little bit nervous about, it's almost a performance, you have a script that you either have to memorize or, it's very in the moment. You have to be doing that. And so I will definitely eat bananas like intentionally for the potassium to slow my heart rate, get a little sugar. So perfect snack. Good call.
Absolutely. Love it. I'm also addicted to nuts. I love all varieties of nuts. I have some favorites, but yeah, there's usually a bag of either like cashews or macadamias or, just the really fatty nuts.
Yeah.
usually have in my bag. So yeah, something like that.
Very satisfying. So, you're an interesting guest on the show for a few reasons. And two of those reasons are that you're a yoga teacher like me, and that you have done house call practice before and you didn't like it. So, which is rare. I mean, but you're also you're in a different place, and we're different people, obviously, but it's a little bit rare on this show to have someone who didn't like doing house call work. So I want to go into that a little bit more later, but for now, can you tell me a little bit about your journey into becoming a yoga teacher?
Of course. So as you said, I qualified as a vet almost 10 years ago now. Goodness knows where that time has gone. And I did try yoga. Actually, the first time I tried yoga, I hated it. And I always say that because it makes me laugh. I was 16 years old. I was really into my sports. Like I played lots of different sports. I was super fit. I was very athletic. And I went to my first yoga class and thought it was a load of nonsense. And get what people were on about. Like I thought it was like not a proper workout.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, I couldn't get my brain to stop whirling about. I didn't see what all the fuss was about. So I kind of just ignored it for the next few years.
Yeah.
Fast forward to my early 20s, I'm in vet school. I think, most of your listeners will know how stressful vet school is.
Yep.
Vet school, like it's a very stressful time, isn't it? And I kind of stumbled back into yoga as a way to try and help initially with stress. I also, historically have had some issues with insomnia, and I had a particularly bad bout of insomnia at vet school. So yeah, and I ended up just getting a little bit more out of it this time. I think, a bit more as I had a bit more maturity, and I was kind of, I'd redefined in my head what I was hoping to get out of yoga compared to when I was a teenager and just wanted to like exercise and burn off energy and, whatever else. So yeah, I loved it, and it kind of became a bit more of a regular practice. But then for me, my yoga practice really solidified as, more than just a hobby and more of a kind of lifestyle choice when I was locuming away in Australia. Because when you're on the other side of the world to your family and the time zones all different, if you've had a really hard day in practice, you can't just pick up the phone and call home because it might be the middle of their night.
Yeah.
So you have to find some way, and don't get me wrong, I have wonderful friends and colleagues in Australia, but you have to find ways of helping yourself mentally to wind down after a busy day or to feel better about the way that things have gone. You can't necessarily rely on other people. So I found myself stepping onto my yoga mat more and more when I was away. And yeah, that's when it became, a very consistent practice and meditation as well. And then when I was living in New Zealand, I had this idea because I saw how yoga and meditation had, the effects that it had on me personally, not only health-wise, like increased flexibility and all that kind of stuff, but also just how the things that I was learning on my yoga mat were actually helping me to enjoy my career a little bit more off my mat as well. And I just thought, well, looking at our, crisis that we have globally in our profession with the mental health issues and the injury rate and all of that kind of stuff, I was just like, we just need to get the word out there that there are these amazing practices that could really be beneficial to our veterinary community. And I had the idea to train as a teacher and kind of start a business because I wanted to deliver them in very evidence-based ways to a scientific community. And also in ways that are realistic for people who have done, long days, weekends on call, night shifts, whatever else it is, to actually fit it in to their life. Because it's fine to turn up to a class and be told that you should be doing an hour a day, 6 days a week or whatever, like in Ashtanga. But for most of us, that is just not feasible.
Right,
right. So, I wanted to find ways to deliver yoga and meditation practices and content to vets, techs, nurses, everyone really in the vet team in ways that they were going to consistently be able to engage with.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And I think especially kind of serving the veterinary community, the evidence-based approach that you take is really important for folks to kind of be able to lock into using this modality as a healing tool and as a, tool for grounding ourselves and recovery really from what the work inherently is. And so I think you do a really beautiful job of making it accessible to veterinarians who think in an evidence-based way, and we gravitate towards that. And as you also said, the risk, and that kind of scared me a little bit when I first became a yoga teacher was, oh, people are going to think this is a load of hogwash and, so woo-woo, and it's not grounded in science, which it actually is the thing. And I remember, what your first initial experience is what I feared of my own colleagues judging me for becoming a yoga teacher. And so it's really interesting that you've sort of it seems inherently that there is that challenge, that kind of conversation, like, is it evidence-based? Is it not? Is this for me as a practicing veterinarian or is it for someone else? And I think in the way that you approach this, you rise to meet that challenge really well.
I suppose for me, what's really interesting about yoga and meditation is, yes, they can just be physical practices, but I'm sure you can relate to this. Like, the more you kind of delve into it, there's such a strong spiritual element to it. And I think it's quite nice to be able to bridge the scientific and the spiritual and kind of meet in the middle somewhere. And there's a whole spectrum along that. So there's a position on that for everybody, really. It's just about finding what feels comfortable to you. And if we can even just get people engaging initially just with the physical, like the asana part, and then maybe they'll start to explore all the other 8 limbs of yoga as a full practice. So, it's only natural that, in our community, we're clinical people. We have that clinical mindset. We have that desire to know why we're doing things, how things work.
Maybe even paired with the cynicism, even in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the one thing that we also just have to be slightly mindful of with that mindset, if it's taken too far, is that sometimes there's a tendency for us to, as scientists, to sometimes maybe think things are too set in stone because we don't understand them, that they're not valid. And you can't dismiss everything that you personally don't understand. So
Brava.
That's digging into the research done by other colleagues. There's so many papers, and I have to say the East, like India, that they're so far ahead of us in the Western world in this regard. So I think also just letting go of the ego that we're maybe slightly guilty of having as scientists.
Maybe slightly guilty.
slightly guilty of having
Brava.
we know it because we can prove it and blah blah. And yes, but then if you also look at how science has progressed, even within the veterinary world, there are things that we do now that we didn't do 5, even 10 years ago. So things move on all the time. So having an open mind as well to things that we don't necessarily 100% understand, I think is also a nice way to approach it.
Beautiful. I mean, I think just that idea of kind of openness and acceptance. I mean, I guess it's different from blind acceptance, but understanding that the world may be bigger than what we know and that we may be part of something bigger than us. And just because we don't understand, that's a very yogic thought itself. Just maybe embracing something just because we ourselves as an individual are not fully in control of every aspect of why the thing might work, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like anything that you do. I mean, we're not fully in control of anything, are we? Like,
right.
That saying in veterinary medicine, sometimes your patients will get better, regardless of you or in spite of you.
Yes.
So I think it's healthy to definitely have a degree of cynicism, definitely have that sense of curiosity and that desire to maybe learn, the how and the why, but also to just have that sense that we won't understand everything that comes our way unless we extensively study it. And we don't have time to extensively study everything. So that is why I'm doing the extensive studying of the yoga meditation, so that I can feed it back in bite-sized ways for people who are time poor.
Love that. Yeah, I love how you've risen to that challenge. And I think you're just really taking a really wise approach to connecting the yoga with the veterinary worlds. And I remember also considering going in that direction, like maybe I'll teach some yoga to veterinarians because I have this interdisciplinary thing going on. And then I was like, okay, no, I'm going to teach yoga for musicians. And there's a whole other mindset in the musician world, but they both have the same. It's almost like a hustle or a need to prove and a need to know and a need to show and a need to perform hardcore. And I think ultimately I ended up not being as brave as you are to meet that head on and address those particular issues in teaching yoga to potentially those groups of people. But you're doing an amazing job. And so you alluded to this a little bit. Can you tell me how you feel yoga helps you off the mat as a veterinarian, like personally in your life?
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's start with the most sort of obvious things. So I used to dance a bit when I was younger, like not professionally or anything, but I used to do lots of sports, as I've already said. And so I was quite, fit and strong and flexible. And then in my early 20s, I had a really horrible back injury where I was unable to even touch my knees if I was bending forward. Everything was so tight. And I think anyone who's had back pain or any kind of chronic pain that's unexpected, like it really kind of takes away your sense of invincibility that you might have when you're younger. And so for me, doing a practice that was enabling me to slowly return my flexibility, slowly restore my strength, but without sort of pushing myself too hard. And I think that's something that many of us are prone to doing in the vet world, is just, pushing. And a lot of us are super competitive, myself included. And so me, my yoga mat became somewhere where I didn't have to compete with myself anymore. I mean, don't get me wrong, I still have the odd day where I'm like, oh, you could do that pose 2 weeks ago. Why can't you do it now? Oh,
all of us. Oh, yeah.
So it's always a work in progress, but the kind of being able to let go of what I think I should be doing, or what I think, or being disappointed that I can't do something, instead just kind of getting on my mat and exploring what I can do, or being grateful for what I could do that day. Or on a really basic level, just being grateful of the fact that I could just get on my mat in the first place, because that might have taken all the willpower that I had that day just to step onto it. So yeah, definitely helped me develop a little bit more self-compassion, I suppose, because I can be very hard on myself. And I think it's helped me over the years to just regulate that critical inner voice that we all have, that tells us sometimes that we don't know enough, or we're not good enough, or we messed this up, or we shouldn't be doing this, whatever. And it just helps me kind of, first of all, identify that and separate it from myself, and then talk it down or ignore it and channel my energy into something else, like a nice flow, or turn that voice down so that I can barely hear it and I have the space to meditate. I mean, they're just a few things. I could go on and on and on about all the ways yoga has helped me as a person, but
Yeah.
I think in terms of, helping me enjoy being a vet a bit more, it just gives you space to have some perspective. So I'm probably a little bit more empathetic than I was to, clients who might be having a bad day. I stopped taking it personally, which is also, I think also just comes with experience. As a vet. It's very easy when you're a new graduate to take things personally because you just have that lack of experience. But yeah, I'd say, it's probably made me a little bit more patient, which was something I was sorely lacking in. And I still probably have a way to go on the patience front. It's not a strength of mine. Yeah, just, basically just being kinder, like, to myself, and trying to be more understanding of those around me where I can. And yeah, just also gave me something else to focus on. I think another thing that we hear and see commonly, because many of us wanted to be vets or vet techs, whatever, for a long time. And it's a long, hard battle to get that qualification and to build a career. So it can almost become our identity that it's not just what we are, it's who we are. Yeah. So having my yoga practice and having that business and having something that I've diversified a way into just is a really solid reminder that I'm more than just a vet. Well, not just a vet, but you know what I mean. Chloe is not just a vet. Chloe is all these different things, and being a vet is one small part of who I am.
Exactly. Oh, I love that. Oh, yeah, that's fantastic. And I was observing as you were speaking and telling us about how this has changed your life and how it's helped you to practice veterinary medicine, that a majority of what you just said is not physical. And you mentioned the word asana before. Can you tell our listeners what's an asana, and what are other aspects of yoga that make yoga yoga? Because it's not, as you said, it's not just the postures, it's not just the positions. So I would love for you to speak a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, so one thing I'm really keen to get across is that what we call kind of yoga in the Western world, if you say you're going to yoga class, we're typically referring to just the movement part of yoga, which is known as asana. So when you're going through your yoga poses or you're flowing through your vinyasa, you are doing your asana practice. So it's all about the movement. But actually, asana is just the third limb out of 8 limbs of yoga. So I won't go into all of them, but, ones that we would typically do even within a class. You may do a little bit of breath work with your yoga teacher, which would be pranayama, the 4th limb. You may do a little bit of meditation or dharma, like I think that's the 6th one. I
don't remember. I don't know.
Yeah. I think it's nice to actually kind of, when you learn about the 8 limbs of yoga and just how much you can integrate different practices into your lifestyle. So it's kind of stops being just about the physical practice. And, it drives me insane when you hear people saying like, oh, yoga is just stretching.
Yeah.
It's really
farther from the truth.
Yeah, I mean, you incorporate so much like mindfulness and the breathing and the union, of the breath, the mind, the body, the union of yourself with the universe. Like there's so much more to it than just the movement. But typically that's what's focused on here, or at least, in our part of the world. But I like to think of like asana as like the gateway to yoga, because if you can get people on the mat and you can get them to open up and to feel the benefits of, taking deep conscious breaths and matching them to movement, or taking a few minutes of mental peace in meditation, like it soon becomes so much more fulfilling than just the movement part itself.
Yeah, really well said. It's a whole philosophy too. It integrates an approach to life as well, So, all of these 8 limbs kind of make up that approach to life, but it's significantly more than just movement and asana. And movement and asana are very important parts of it, but really well said. It's a great gateway. It's fun. It's fun to do the movements, but there's so much more.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, like I'm always very mindful to state that I'm by no means like a yoga expert. When you look at the students in India who've studied yoga and yoga philosophy from being small children, and they've dedicated their entire lives to the study and practice of yoga, they're all the people that we should be like lifting up and learning from. And really, I think we're just kind of vessels for channeling that information into the communities that we're a part of. So there's so much more to it than even what I would say I practice on a regular basis, because as much as I love yoga, my whole life is not dedicated to yoga in the same way that it was not just dedicated to veterinary. But yeah, I mean, it really is mind-blowing. That's one thing as well I love with engaging the veterinary community, is that just like veterinary medicine, veterinary surgery, they're all lifelong learning.
Yes.
Like yoga is a lifelong learning thing. Like you will never know everything there is to know about yoga in the same way that you will never know everything there is to know about veterinary. So it's good for people who like to continue to learn and expand their knowledge base, I think.
Yeah, I love your humility with that. And I love your kind of recognizing the culture from which this comes, because it's very easy when we're working with the practices and the especially spiritual practices of other cultures to appropriate, to inadvertently do a cultural appropriation type of thing. And I think it's really nice to recognize the culture that we've learned this from and to sort of pass back the baton, or the whatever you want to call it, and see ourselves as vessels, not necessarily authorities of this beautiful practice that we have ourselves studied and are passing on as well. But the origin is, as we know, India.
100. And I definitely don't always get it right. And I think if
none of us do.
Is just try your best and what sits right with you authentically, and make sure that you are listening to those voices who are a part of the culture and prioritizing them in your teaching. I purposely chose to go and do some yoga teacher training in India because I wanted to go right back to the source, and I wanted to learn from Indian teachers as well. But yeah, it's very it's, I think, how do I say it, I think it's fine to teach yoga regardless of what culture you come from. But I think that you do need to acknowledge the thousands of years of history, culture that has gone into the practice to get you to the point where you are at in your teaching. So that's important to me, and I try my best, to use the Sanskrit names and explain the stories behind some of the poses and things like that. But I'm not saying I always get the pronunciation right either, and I'm really sorry to any Sanskrit aficionados who listen to my classes and think, oh God, she butchered that one. But I'm constantly learning too. So
yeah. I think in this domain, I mean, yoga itself, as you said, is constant learning, and yoga is everything, is one of the philosophies. And so it makes sense for people of all cultures to embrace that and to teach it if that's a part of their own learning experience as well, to be teaching. They say, see one, do one, teach one. And on that level, I found when I became a yoga teacher, that was part of my journey. My next step in leaning into my yoga practice was to learn how to teach. And so that was therapeutic to me too. So there really is a balance, and I like how you phrase that for sure. And so, as you mentioned, you're not only doing yoga, you are a vet, of course. And so I want to shift gears a little bit and find out a little bit more about what you're doing now as a vet, what your experience was like as a house call vet in the UK, or were you also doing house call vet work in Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, any of those? Was that happening there as well?
Okay, so maybe I'll just start with sort of what I'm doing at the moment.
Okay.
So when I first qualified, as you said in my lovely kind intro that you did, I started off in mixed practice. So I was doing small animal, equine, large animal. I did that for a few years. And then for the last several years, I've been just a small animal, companion animal vet. But I locum. So I've been like a professional locum, essentially. I have used my vet skills to travel. So I've worked in Australia, New Zealand, obviously various parts of the UK. I've worked in the Cook Islands.
I love the Cook Islands. Can I interrupt you for a minute? That's the best place I've ever been in my life.
I know, stunning.
Magic.
So yeah, I've been really lucky to work in lots of different places, and I do primarily first opinion work. I also will do some emergency work. For instance, not last week, the week before, I was on a week of night shifts covering emergency for a practice. And I did house call work as a small part of a locum job a few years ago, but I was like solely just doing house call stuff, like out of the van for that short period of time. So it was a few weeks. I think over here,
And it was in the UK?
Yeah, in the UK. Over here, if you're working in first opinion practice, you might have to do the odd house call where you have to go and do a home euthanasia visit or something, but once in a blue moon, and that was all stopped over COVID anyway. But yeah, I had a couple of weeks where it was just me and a nurse in a van, and we were driving around, doing the house call veterinary experience. And yeah, it was definitely a different way of working.
It is.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, you're just wanting me to get into it now, aren't
Yes,
you?
I am.
So, I think it's probably easiest to start off by saying what I love about being a vet. So, my favorite things to do are to be in theatre and surgery and doing emergency work and working, patients up to the best of my kind of ability, which hopefully gets us somewhere near an answer or, getting in specialists to help with that. So I found the parts of my job that are my favorite were non-existent.
Got it.
Area. So, I had no time in theatre whatsoever, which I really missed. Well, I did see a couple of emergency cases that were not booked in as emergency, but when I saw them, I was like, goodness me, these animals are really quite unwell. But then, of course, I had to send them back to the the hospital, which is where I would have liked to have been on the other end of that.
Got it.
Admitting them, doing the workup, and that kind of thing. And to be honest with you, I found going into, as a locum, I've worked in, tons of different practices all over the place. I've worked with lots of different teams, lots of different setups, from like purpose-built hospitals to converted old buildings and houses and things. And so I'm very used to working in lots of different places, but I think I really wasn't keen, to be honest, on just going into clients' homes all the time, because I have a lot of respect for you guys. It requires a lot of patience, which I've already alluded to. I'm not high up on the list when they were doling out the patients for people. So I just found it super frustrating sometimes. Like, you'd arrive and you'd be there to see a cat, and they wouldn't have bothered to like keep the cat in an area that was easily accessible, or so the cat was gone, or get there. And I was lucky that I had a vet nurse, or vet tech as you guys call them, with me, who was great, and they really made the job bearable for me, because they were able to do all the professional restraining and chat to the client a bit whilst I was concentrating on what I was wanting to do, or listening to the heart. And so I don't know if you guys always have a person with you or if you just do it by yourselves, but either way, have a lot of respect. It just wasn't for me. It just wasn't for me. We were quite busy too, I think, because it was a house call service that was tacked on to a busy first opinion practice.
I see.
So it wasn't like I was in control of the diary. I turned up and was given the house call diary for that day.
And in the UK, you're using the word diary to mean scheduler.
Yeah.
Just translating here a little bit.
Exactly. So
yeah.
I didn't really have the control that you maybe would if it was your own business, for instance. And yeah, I felt like, some houses were just not very clean. Like it just, others were fine. It just, for me, maybe it just highlighted I am perhaps a bit of a control freak, because I like to have like the setup of the hospital behind you to be able to be like, here's everything we need, we're good to go. And it just wasn't for me. It just wasn't for me.
Yeah. It's really like funny and interesting for me to hear this. And it's also fair. It's very fair. I mean, it sounds like you gravitate towards like the really intense part of veterinary medicine. Yeah. I used to be like that. I used to think I wanted to be a surgical board certified surgeon. I was in surgical residency for a while. I even took it that far. I thought I liked ER. Turns out I don't. Turns out my life is way better when I, in my life, remove that intensity. But for you, it seems that's really what creates your passion and where you shine and where you do a great job. And, or Or maybe you're making an interesting face. Maybe it's what you feel you have to do. I don't know.
No,
Is that true for you?
I think, yeah, to some extent, definitely. I mean, it's definitely what I enjoy. Working under pressure is something that ticks my boxes, maybe.
Yeah.
So now it's all coming out as to why I need so much yoga, because I'm purposely
Right.
putting myself in these situations that can be quite stressful. So I think similarly to you, Eve, like I never went down the sort of surgical residency path, or, I don't think the stage I am in my life or career, I would enjoy doing that all the time. And that's what, having my yoga business has given me, in that now for the past couple of years, I'm vetting part-time, like 2 or 3 days a week. And that was a huge adjustment for me mentally, to kind of get the message across to myself that you're still a proper vet if you're not,
Yeah.
vetting full time or whatever, or you're not working ridiculous hours a week, like 80-hour weeks or whatever it was. So I do love the busy, high pressure emergency situations,
Yeah.
but I think I've realized, I then need decompression time.
Yeah.
I can't just keep going and going and going anymore. Like
Right. Right.
it's a one-way street to burnout for me if I am just
Yeah.
doing it all the time. And I think I did recognize, earlier on when I took the decision to start VetYogi and go down the slight diversification route, that I was probably experiencing adrenal fatigue,
Yeah.
from doing all the on-call, all the higher pressure stuff, like all the time. And don't get me wrong, I know some colleagues who, that is their world, and that's what they love, and all power to them. But for me, I've just come to recognize needing a bit more of a balance. But I think for me, the house call world was a little bit too much the other way. In terms of just not doing the things I love. Like, I'm just super happy in theatre, scalpel in hand, ready to operate. And I just wasn't really getting that part of me
Yeah.
as a fulfilled.
Yeah, and that's totally fair. You are a total badass, so I'm just gonna put that out there. And it's yeah, I mean that sort of checking off the check boxes, I relate to that very much. And I love how you kind of found your balance. And for me, finding my balance was like just taking my whole career down in intensity, all of it. Like, house call vet practice is way more mellow, and you're not, it's not for an adrenaline junkie or even a recovering adrenaline junkie. Or not that you're an adrenaline junkie, but I thought I was. I sort of related to that.
Yeah.
Most vets have a touch of that, but I mean, you're absolutely right. It's kind of the polar opposite of that. It's slow. And if you don't have control also, like you mentioned, if you were the business
Yeah.
owner, there would have been some things different for sure.
Yeah. And I'm just very used to, as a locum, I say, I set my own days that I will work as a vet. I set my own days when I will teach yoga. So that kind of wasn't really there in that. But, the other thing I just sort of say is it's all well and good to be saying why I didn't enjoy it because of what my strengths are. But the other reason I didn't enjoy it, which is one of the things that might appeal to some of my colleagues, is that I do not do well if I'm constantly having to be in consults all the time and, having to talk to people all the time. Like, it's but this is something I've come to recognize about myself. And for me, it's very different being out the back with your colleagues and being able to chat about your cases, or being, chatting because you get to know them and that kind of thing. But I actually find it in the same way that someone might find, doing 3 bitch bays back to back draining. Like, I'll take that any day over a morning of consulting and having to repeat yourself all the time about vaccines and worming and blah blah blah. Like, it's I think you have to play to your strengths and also be aware of what your weaknesses are, or the areas that you don't enjoy. And so if you have any kind of control to be able to move yourself away from the things that you enjoy less, that's quite lucky. But I can fully see how I think I sit on that, introvert, extrovert midway point, because I can be extremely extroverted, but I need my time to then recover. But I could see how colleagues who are more extrovert and got their energy from engaging with clients and talking to people, they could really thrive in the house call vet world in a way that I just wouldn't. I'd find it a bit draining.
Yeah, that's really fair. That's a really interesting subject. And I did want to clarify for folks who are listening that house call vet practice isn't inherently back-to-back consults where you're talking all the time. I mean, it may be if you work for someone else, if you work for a practice that dictates your schedule or your diary, or tells you how long you have to be in that appointment and how many you have to see per day. But I think what's really cool, and I wanted to kind of clarify, is the way I do it, because I own my own business, is I don't see more than usually 3 appointments per day. So most of my day I'm not talking. Most of the day I have full control over my introvert extrovert balance, and I feel very similar to you. I'm right on that line between extrovert and introvert, and like when I cross into introvert land, it is so painful to have to talk to people. I hate And that's why I thought I wanted to do surgery too, because I was like, oh good, more time in the OR. I can be in my little like space bubble in my own head, doing my surgery, not talking to people, saying the same thing over. So it's very interesting that I ended up, for the same reasons, finding house call practice in the way that I do it to fulfill those same things. But you're absolutely right. When you don't have control over your schedule and you have to just be in consults all day, that's really exhausting. And so I hear you. Like, I don't blame you one bit. And I'm really glad you mentioned that, because that is a really important difference between owning your own practice and working for someone else in that particular context. So thanks for sharing that.
Well, no, thank you for clarifying as well, because I think, what you're doing with your business and also your academy, which educating people who are wanting to go down the house call vet route, just, how it can be and how they can make it work for them. And, I think it's so important. And it's wonderful when you start to realize how you can kind of work in your flow or work to your strengths. And I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I think we were doing like 8 calls a day, and I was only working until 2:30 as well. And then I would go back to the main practice and do the last little bit. So it was very like, here's a call, here's your next call, because everything in the UK is so much closer together as well. All a bit up more on top of each other. And it was a really busy town where I was working. So it was like, here's your call, on to the next one, quick lunch break, on to the next one, so it was.
Oh, I don't blame you for hating it. I would hate that too. I would not be pleased.
So basically it was just nothing that I like and everything that I don't really like as much.
Funny. That's really funny. And I also thought it was funny that you mentioned about some of the houses being dirty. Like, I've had that experience before too, and it's a real thing. And if you can't screen your clients, you can't pick who you yourself are seeing, like, that can be really uncomfortable.
And I mean, most of them were fine, and there may be legitimate reasons, why people can't keep on top of everything health-wise or whatever. But I just found it really disheartening, to be honest, to be like in a work environment that made you physically uncomfortable and you didn't feel like you were necessarily being able to do your best, or like come away feeling clean to then go to the next person. Like, like a bit of a sterilization and. And I also have a thing, like, I really cannot stand cigarette smoke. I cannot stand it. So if you go into someone's house where it's just like stinks of that, like, it's not going to go well. Like,
yeah. I mean, there are definitely times where you're working in situations that are suboptimal, and where the place reeks of cigarette smoke, or it's like filthy, or it smells disgusting for some other, like, you're not putting forth your best foot. Like, that is true.
And like, you're putting more energy into like politely schooling your face and your tone. No, like, and it just wasn't for me. It just wasn't for me.
Okay, guys, thanks for tuning in. We actually went for quite a while longer than my usual podcast episodes, because the conversation got so interesting that I decided to go ahead and split this episode into 2. So please tune in for our next episode. We're going to get deep into boundaries, more on yoga, just so many interesting subjects. So I hope you'll join us for part 2 with Dr. Chloe. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the House Call Vet Cafe. If you enjoyed this episode, then hit the subscribe or follow button on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts so you never have to miss an episode. This podcast is made specifically for you, so don't be shy if you'd like to reach out and let me know your thoughts on this episode. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook as The House Call Vet Academy, where I also share more valuable content. If you're interested in learning more about consulting for House Call Vets or the House Call Vet Academy online course and community, please click on the link in the show notes. Have an amazing rest of your day, and I can't wait for you to join us for our next episode of the House Call Vet Cafe.